What would you do if someone you never knew existed walked into your life, after your mother's death? Emma stood at the edge of the cemetery, her hand gripping the bouquet of roses. The morning sun cast a soft, golden glow over the rows of tombstones, the air still and heavy with the kind of quiet that only a graveyard could offer. It had been 2 years since their mother, Susan Matthews, passed away, 2 years since Emma had stood here last, alongside her brother Jake, honoring a woman who had always felt more like a distant memory than a mother. 2 years. And yet, the pain still felt raw, the questions still unspoken. Jake was next to her, his hands shoved into the pockets of his worn leather jacket. He was quieter than usual, more withdrawn. Emma had expected him to be like this today. After all, today wasn't just any day, it was the anniversary of their mother's death. The silence stretched between them, thick with unvoiced words and old resentments. "I still don't get why we're doing this," Jake finally muttered, his voice rough. "Mom wouldn't have wanted us here." Emma didn't look at him. Instead, her eyes traced the letters on the gravestone in front of her. Susan Matthews. Loving mother. 1963 to 2023. "I don't know," Emma said softly, almost to herself. "Maybe I need to be here, to understand." Jake scoffed. "Understand what?" "That she was perfect." "She wasn't, Emma. She was human. And humans, they mess up." Emma took a deep breath, feeling the weight of Jake's words settle in her chest. She'd spent years trying to understand her mother, trying to reconcile the loving mom she'd grown up with and the secrets she'd learned about after her passing. Secrets that had shaken her to the core. "Maybe," she said, her voice tight, "but we still don't have all the answers." Just then, a shadow fell over the gravestone. Emma and Jake both turned in unison, their eyes immediately locking on the figure standing at the far end of the graveyard. A man. Tall, with dark, untamed hair and a rugged demeanor that seemed out of place among the well-manicured headstones. He was wearing a black leather jacket, much like Jake's, but his hands were buried deep in his pockets, his gaze fixed intently on the ground before him. The moment Emma saw him, her pulse quickened. There was something familiar about him. The man looked up, his eyes meeting theirs for a brief, intense moment. "Who's that?" Jake asked, his voice low and cautious. Emma shook her head, just as confused as Jake. "I don't know, but he's looking at us." Before she could say another word, the man began to walk toward them. Each step seemed deliberate, his eyes never leaving their faces. "Emma," Jake muttered, gripping her arm slightly, "something's off." The man stopped a few feet away, glancing from Emma to Jake before speaking in a voice that carried a quiet intensity. "Are you Susan Matthews' children?" he asked, his tone unhurried but sure. Emma blinked, caught off guard by his question. "Yeah, we are." "Who are you?" The man hesitated for a moment before responding. I'm Michael. Michael Donovan." At the sound of the name, Emma felt a strange chill run through her. She could feel Jake tense beside her, his grip on her arm tightening. Michael Donovan. She had never heard that name before. But there was something about the way he said it, something that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. "How do you know our mother?" Jake asked, his voice edged with suspicion. Michael's eyes flickered with an emotion that Emma couldn't quite place, something between pain and uncertainty. He seemed to be weighing his words carefully before speaking again. "I knew your mother, a long time ago," Michael said softly, almost as if lost in the memory. We were close." The word close hung in the air, heavy and thick with implication. Emma's heart skipped a beat. Her mind raced, trying to process what Michael was saying. Close. Her mother, Susan Matthews, had been private, secretive even. She'd never once mentioned a man named Michael Donovan. Jake crossed his arms, his gaze sharp. "What does that mean? Were you with her?" The edge of anger in his voice was unmistakable. Michael nodded, though his expression remained pained. Yes. But it wasn't that simple. Emma's breath caught in her throat. She had so many questions, but none of them seemed to form properly in her mind. Why are you here? Emma asked finally, her voice trembling slightly as the weight of the conversation pressed down on her chest. What do you want? Michael looked at her, his gaze softening. I want to explain. I need to let you know the truth about your mother. There's something important you need to understand. Emma looked at Jake, who still seemed unwilling to trust the stranger, but something inside her stirred. There was a quiet urgency in Michael's eyes, a plea for understanding that she couldn't quite ignore. I'm not sure you'll believe me, Michael continued, his voice barely a whisper, but I'm your brother. The words hit Emma like a tidal wave. Her breath caught in her throat, and for a long moment, she couldn't speak. Jake's eyes widened in disbelief. What the hell are you talking about? I'm your half-brother, Michael said, his voice steady. Your mother, she had a son before you two were born. She gave me up when she was young. And I've been looking for you ever since. The world seemed to tilt beneath Emma's feet as she tried to process what Michael was saying. A half-brother? A sibling she never knew existed? Her mind was a whirl of confusion, disbelief, and curiosity. Jake stepped back, shaking his head. This is insane. You expect us to believe that? Michael held up his hands, his expression earnest. I know it's hard to believe, but I swear, I'm telling you the truth. I have the proof, if you'll let me show you. Emma couldn't move, couldn't speak. She just stood there, staring at this man who claimed to be her brother, at the grave of the woman who had kept this secret from them their entire lives. For the first time in years, Emma felt a knot tighten in her chest, not just from the grief of losing their mother, but from the realization that the life she thought she knew, the family she thought she had, was built on a lie. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Michael stood in front of them, his dark eyes locked with Emma's, waiting for a reaction. The words he had just spoken, I'm your half-brother, hung in the air like a bomb waiting to go off. Emma felt a dizziness crawl up from her stomach, spreading throughout her body. She couldn't fully grasp what he was saying. A brother? How could that be possible? Jake, on the other hand, was already shaking his head, stepping back a few paces, his hands raised in a defensive posture. This is crazy, he muttered under his breath. You're a stranger. You don't know anything about us or Mom. Michael's gaze never wavered. I know it's hard to believe. But I didn't come here to make trouble, I came because it's time for you to know the truth. His voice was calm, almost pleading, as if he'd rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in his mind, but the pain in his eyes was undeniable. Emma opened her mouth, but no words came out. She wasn't even sure what question to ask first. Everything she thought she knew about her mother's life was suddenly in question. How could she keep something like this from us? Michael must have sensed her confusion. He took a step closer, but not too close. He respected the distance, as if giving her the space to process what he had just dropped on her. I'm sorry for showing up like this, he said softly. But I couldn't wait any longer. Your mother and I, we had a relationship before you were born. She was forced to let me go when she was just a teenager. Emma's mind raced as she tried to process the enormity of his words. A relationship? What does that even mean? She looked at Jake, who seemed just as stunned, but also deeply skeptical. You're saying you're our brother? Jake asked incredulously, the disbelief evident in his voice. But we never heard a thing about you. Nothing, ever. Michael's face tightened with emotion, and for a moment, Emma saw a flicker of pain in his eyes. He opened his mouth to respond, but Emma was the one who spoke first. How do you know about us? She asked, her voice quiet but firm. If you're really our brother, how come we've never heard anything about you? Not even once. Michael looked down at the ground for a moment, the silence between them heavy. I know about you because I've spent years looking for you. Your mother never wanted me to find you. She made sure of that. His voice faltered at the end of his sentence, and Emma could see that the words cost him something. What? Jake asked, the confusion in his voice rising. Why would she hide you from us? Emma turned to Jake, feeling a growing knot in her stomach. What kind of woman was their mother, really? It wasn't just about the secrecy, it was about the depth of it. How had she managed to keep a part of her life so hidden? I don't have all the answers, Michael admitted, his voice low. But I have the proof. I can show you who I am. I kept a journal, letters, things your mother left behind. Things she didn't want you to know. Emma's heart raced. A journal? Letters? Could this really be true? Could Michael be telling the truth about their mother? She couldn't ignore the ache that had settled in her chest, the way the past she thought she understood was unraveling before her eyes. I don't know if I'm ready to hear any of this, Jake said, his voice raw with emotion. It doesn't make sense. If Mom wanted us to know about you, she would have told us. Michael nodded slowly, as if he understood the difficulty they were facing. I get it. But you should know that your mother, she made sacrifices. She thought she was protecting you by keeping me away. But she never stopped thinking about me. Never stopped wondering how I was doing. And when I found out about her death, I couldn't stay away anymore. I had to find you. Emma felt a lump in her throat. Her mother, Susan Matthews, had kept secrets. Secrets she had never even hinted at. Emma had always known that her mother was private, that there were parts of her life she had kept hidden, but this was something far more complicated than she could have imagined. You're saying that after all these years, you just show up here? Jake's voice broke through her thoughts, still filled with anger and confusion. And we're supposed to believe you? Just like that? Michael's expression softened, and he shook his head. I don't expect you to believe me right away. But I can prove it to you. I can take you to places your mother loved, people she knew. I have everything you need to understand who I am. You can decide for yourselves. Emma felt her stomach tighten. This was no longer just about Michael showing up at their mother's grave. This was about everything she had known being called into question. She looked at Jake, her mind racing. What should we do? This stranger, this man who claimed to be her brother, was asking them to trust him, trust the very person their mother had kept secret for so long. Could they do that? Just give us some time, Emma said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. We need to think. We need answers. Michael's eyes flickered with a mix of relief and sorrow. He nodded slowly. I understand. But please know this, I'm not here to hurt you. I'm just here to make things right. Without waiting for another word, Michael turned and began to walk away, his steps slow and deliberate. Emma and Jake stood in silence, watching him disappear into the distance. As he walked away, Emma felt the weight of everything she had just learned pressing down on her. The truth, her mother's truth, was out there somewhere, waiting to be uncovered. And she wasn't sure if she was ready for what came next. For the first time in years, Emma wasn't sure who she was anymore. She had always thought her family was just like any other. But now everything had changed. The days following Michael's unexpected appearance were a blur. Emma couldn't shake the image of him standing at the graveyard, claiming to be her half-brother. The more she thought about it, the more her mind swirled with questions. Who was this man? Why had their mother kept him a secret for all these years? And what did it all mean for the life she had built since Susan's death? She hadn't spoken much to Jake since that day. He had retreated into himself, his usual sarcastic exterior masking a whirlwind of confusion. Emma could sense his hesitation, his disbelief, but he hadn't said much more about Michael. Instead, he focused on work, avoiding the subject completely. Emma, on the other hand, was consumed by it. She had spent hours digging through old boxes of photographs, letters, and mementos that had once belonged to their mother, trying to find some kind of clue, some sign that Michael was who he claimed to be. But everything she found only deepened the mystery. Her mother's life before Emma and Jake, before the two of them, seemed like a closed chapter, one she had left behind without so much as a trace. The thought of Michael kept her awake at night. What if he was telling the truth? What if everything she had known about her mother's life was just a carefully constructed lie? That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Emma stood by the window in her apartment, staring out at the city below. The glow of the streetlight seemed far away, distant. She felt the weight of the past pressing in on her, the quiet reminder that nothing in her life, nothing about her family, was as it seemed. A knock on the door startled her, and her heart skipped a beat. She wasn't expecting anyone. Slowly, she crossed the room, her feet hesitant as she approached the door. When she opened it, she was met with the last person she expected to see. Michael stood there, his hands in his pockets, looking a bit out of place in the quiet apartment hallway. His eyes softened when they met hers, and for a moment, Emma could see the earnestness in his gaze. "I know it's late," he said quietly, his voice calm, "but I thought it was time we talked. I've got something for you." Emma frowned, a mixture of emotions rising within her. She stepped back from the door, letting him in. As he crossed the threshold, she noticed the bag he was carrying, bulging, almost like it contained something important. Michael set the bag down gently on the table in her living room and glanced at her, his expression tight with a nervous energy she hadn't seen before. "I didn't want to push you," he said. "But I think it's time you saw the proof." He pulled out a stack of papers, photographs, and a worn notebook, placing them carefully on the table. He looked at her then, his eyes searching hers for any sign of belief. Emma's pulse quickened. The truth was right in front of her, but her mind struggled to make sense of it. She hadn't expected him to show up like this, not so suddenly, and not with something so tangible. "What is all this?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly as she reached for the papers. She flipped through the photographs first. There were pictures of a young woman who looked strikingly like their mother, though she was much younger, her hair longer, her smile more carefree. The images captured her in what seemed to be a much different time, surrounded by people Emma didn't recognize. One photograph in particular caught Emma's attention. It was a group photo, a young woman in a white dress standing next to a man who looked remarkably similar to Michael. The man was smiling, his arm around her waist in an intimate, yet not overtly romantic, way. It was obvious they were close. "I don't understand," Emma whispered, turning the photo over in her hands. "Why are you in these pictures?" Michael exhaled slowly, rubbing the back of his neck. "That's your mother, Susan, when she was still a teenager. I was there, with her. This was taken before she left for the life she built with you too." His voice wavered slightly, the emotion obvious as he spoke about a version of Susan she would never know. "This is the woman I knew. The one who was forced to give me up." Emma's hands trembled as she turned the photo back over, her mind swirling. The life she built with us. How could their mother have a life before them, a life they never knew about? She sifted through more papers. There were letters, some in Susan's handwriting, others written in a more formal script that Emma didn't recognize. The words on the pages were faint, faded by time, but Emma could make out a few lines. She read one aloud to herself. "I'm sorry, Michael. I've made a choice for you, for us. I can't keep you. But I'll always love you. You are my son. I'll carry you in my heart." Emma felt a lump form in her throat. The words were heartbreaking. The love that radiated from them, despite the pain, was undeniable. But why had Susan chosen to keep this from them? Why had she let them live their entire lives without knowing about Michael? Michael watched her carefully, his voice low. "Those letters were all I had for years. Your mother wrote to me, even after she had you and Jake. She never stopped loving me, Emma. She just couldn't keep me. And when she met your father, she started a new life, a life that didn't include me. But I've never forgotten her. And I've never forgotten you. Emma closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of the emotions pressing on her. How could she have known this, and kept it hidden? 1,000 questions flooded her mind, and yet, there was something about the way Michael was speaking, something in the sincerity of his words, that made her hesitate. She looked at him then, her gaze unwavering. Why now? Why come to us after all these years? Michael hesitated before answering. Because I couldn't live with the fact that I never got to know you. I wanted to reach out to you when your mom passed, but I didn't know how. I waited, hoping you'd come to me. But when I saw you two at the cemetery, I knew I had to finally make myself known. Emma swallowed hard. What do you expect from us, Michael? Do you want to be a part of our lives now? Just like that? Michael's face softened, his eyes filled with a quiet sadness. I don't expect anything. I just want you to know the truth. I want you to know about the mother you had, who she really was. And if you're willing, maybe we can start from there. But I'll respect whatever you decide. The silence in the room was deafening. Emma's heart raced as she tried to absorb everything Michael had shared, everything that had been hidden from her for so long. She had more questions than answers, but one thing was clear, the past was far from over. The story of her family was only just beginning to unfold. Emma sat at the kitchen table, the papers Michael had left scattered in front of her. Her hands shook as she ran through them again, each photograph, each letter from her mother a piece of a story she had never been told. The woman she had known as her mother, the person who had raised her and Jake, who had been their anchor through life, wasn't the whole woman after all. There had been parts of her that had been kept locked away, behind a veil of secrets and half-truths. Michael's words echoed in her head, I've spent years looking for you. Your mother never wanted me to find you. She made sure of that. It didn't make sense. Why would Susan, a woman who had seemed so open, so loving, keep a secret this big? The more Emma thought about it, the more questions piled up, each one more confusing than the last. Why hadn't their mother told them? Why had she protected this man, this brother, from them? She picked up the photograph again, studying the image of Susan as a young woman, smiling beside a man who could only be Michael. It was clear from the way they stood together that they had been close. But there was no sign of this in any of the stories Susan had ever told them. Susan had been such a private person, but never in her wildest imaginings had Emma suspected a past like this. The doorbell rang, pulling Emma out of her thoughts. She stood up slowly, unsure if she was ready to face anyone after everything that had happened. But when she opened the door, she found Jake standing there, his arms crossed over his chest, his face set in that familiar, stubborn expression. Hey, he said, his voice softer than usual. Can we talk? Emma stepped aside to let him in, and he followed her to the living room. They both sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the conversation hanging heavy between them. Emma could tell that Jake, like her, was struggling to process everything. His usual bravado had melted away, leaving behind a confused and conflicted man. So, he started, his voice still rough, I've been thinking about it. About Michael, and everything he said. Emma nodded, pushing the papers aside and looking at her brother. I don't know what to think. I mean, there's proof, Jake. Proof that he's telling the truth. Letters, photographs. He's our brother. Jake exhaled sharply, rubbing his face. Yeah, but, it doesn't make sense. How could Mom, how could Susan, keep something like that from us? It's not like her. She was always so open with us. So protective. I know, Emma whispered. That's the part that gets me too. I always thought I knew her, you know. I thought we had the whole picture. But now, I don't know. Jake stood up and began pacing the room, his mind clearly racing. It just feels wrong. I don't know how to wrap my head around it. If he's really our brother, why didn't she tell us? Why didn't she give us a chance to know him? To at least be part of his life? Emma had asked herself the same questions a dozen times. The silence between them felt thick, and Emma couldn't shake the sense that something was missing. That there was still so much more to uncover, so much more their mother had kept hidden from them. We have to find out why, Emma finally said, her voice determined. We can't just leave it like this. If Michael is telling the truth, if he's really our brother, we deserve to know everything. We deserve to understand why Mom kept him from us. Jake stopped pacing and turned to look at her. I'm with you. But this feels like a lot. I don't know if I'm ready to dive into all of this. Emma understood. She wasn't sure she was ready either, but there was no going back now. The truth had been laid bare, and they had no choice but to face it head-on. For their own sake, and for their mother's memory. I don't think we have a choice, she said softly. If we don't figure this out, it's just going to eat at us forever. Jake nodded slowly, though his jaw was clenched. I'll help. But I need some time to process this. I need to figure out how I feel about all of it. Emma gave him a small, understanding smile. We'll take it one step at a time. But we can't keep avoiding it. He gave her a faint smile back, though it was clear he was still struggling with the reality of the situation. So, what's the next step? You think we should talk to Michael again? Emma felt a mixture of anxiety and resolve stir in her. I think we need to. I don't know what he's going to tell us, but we have to hear it from him. Maybe there's more to the story that we don't know. Jake's brow furrowed. And if he's lying? Emma didn't have an answer for that. The possibility that Michael could be lying, could be manipulating them, was something she hadn't allowed herself to consider, but the doubt was creeping in. She shook her head, pushing the thought aside. I don't think he is. I want to believe him. Jake didn't reply. He just stood there, looking at her, and for a moment, Emma felt the weight of the uncertainty between them. Well, Jake said after a pause, his voice low, I guess we'll see what happens when we talk to him. But this doesn't sit well with me, Em. There's still too much we don't know. I know, Emma whispered. But we're going to find out. We have to. And with that, they both knew that there was no turning back. The truth about their family, the truth about their mother, was waiting to be uncovered. The road ahead would be long, and full of more questions than answers. But they would face it together. They had to. A week later, the siblings found themselves parked in front of a small, weathered house on Maple Street, a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood just 20 minutes outside the city. It was the address Michael had given them. According to him, this house belonged to a woman named Margaret Lane, an old friend of their mother's, someone who might hold the missing pieces of the past. Emma sat behind the wheel, staring at the faded blue paint on the house's siding, nerves swirling in her chest. The front porch sagged slightly, and a wind chime hanging near the door tinkled lazily in the breeze. This feels like something out of a movie, Jake muttered beside her, arms crossed, chewing on the corner of his lip the way he always did when he was uneasy. Emma didn't answer right away. She was too busy wondering what exactly they were about to walk into. Michael had said Margaret knew everything, that she was the only one left who could speak to what really happened all those years ago. You sure about this? Jake asked, though he made no move to stop her as she turned off the ignition. No, Emma said honestly, but we have to know. Jake exhaled through his nose, gave a tight nod, and got out of the car. The porch creaked beneath their feet as they approached the front door. Emma raised her hand to knock, but before she could, the door creaked open on its own. An elderly woman stood behind the screen, wearing a knitted shawl and a guarded expression. Her gray hair was pulled into a neat bun, and a pair of reading glasses sat low on her nose. You must be Susan's kids, she said. Not a question. A statement. Emma blinked, startled. Yes. I'm Emma, this is Jake. The woman studied them for a beat longer, then pushed the screen door open and stepped aside. Come in. I was wondering when you'd come knocking. The living room smelled faintly of lavender and old books. Everything looked carefully preserved, photo frames neatly arranged on the mantel, doilies on the armrests of the couch, and a floral teacup resting on a tray beside a worn leather chair. Margaret motioned for them to sit. I'm not going to waste time pretending I don't know why you're here, she said as she lowered herself into the chair. Michael told me you'd reach out eventually. Jake raised an eyebrow. So it's all true. He's really our brother? Margaret nodded without hesitation. Yes. He is. Emma felt a cold wave pass through her, even though she'd already begun to believe it. Hearing it from someone else, a stranger who had nothing to gain, made it real in a different way. Why didn't our mom tell us, she asked quietly, the question more to herself than to Margaret. Margaret's expression softened, and she leaned forward slightly. Susan was complicated. She was strong, but she carried a lot of pain. When she got pregnant with Michael, she was just 17. Her parents, your grandparents, were the kind of people who cared more about appearances than family. They forced her to give him up. Emma's heart clenched. She wanted to keep him, Margaret continued, but she didn't have a choice. Her parents sent her away for the last few months of the pregnancy. After Michael was born, they told her she needed to move on. So she did. Jake scoffed, anger creeping into his tone. She just moved on. Like nothing happened. No, Margaret said firmly. She never forgot him. She wrote to him every year, sent gifts on his birthdays. But the adoption was closed. For a long time, she had no idea where he was. She had no rights. Emma looked down at her hands. So when she had us. She was terrified, Margaret said. Terrified that if she told you, it would ruin the life she had built. That you'd judge her. That you'd see her differently. Emma felt a lump rising in her throat. It wasn't judgment she felt, it was heartbreak. Her mother had been through something devastating and carried it in silence for decades. That kind of pain, it must have changed her. And they'd never even seen it. She never forgave herself, Margaret added softly. She always said Michael deserved more than she could give. But she loved him. She loved all three of you. Jake leaned forward, his voice tense. Did she ever try to find him? Like really find him? Margaret nodded. She hired a private investigator once. But she never followed through. I think, part of her was too afraid of what she'd find. Or that he'd hate her. Silence fell in the room. Emma's heart ached for her mother, Susan, the woman she'd only ever known in fragments. The woman who had held their family together, while inside, she was quietly breaking. She left something for you, Margaret said suddenly. After she died. She gave it to me years ago. Told me to hold on to it until, well, until this happened. She stood slowly and shuffled down the hallway. When she returned, she was holding a small wooden box, old and smooth, with a brass latch. Emma took it carefully, her hands trembling as she opened the lid. Inside was a bundle of letters, each one addressed in Susan's handwriting. There was one for Jake. One for Emma. And one more, thicker, heavier, addressed simply to Michael. She wrote them before she passed. Jake asked, staring at his envelope. She wrote them over the years, Margaret said. Added to them little by little. Hoped she'd be able to deliver them herself. But she knew she might not get that chance. Emma felt tears stinging at the corners of her eyes. The room, the moment, it all felt too big to contain. I can't tell you what to do with them, Margaret said gently. But I think she wanted you to know that no matter how messy her choices were, they came from love. She loved all of you, in the only way she knew how. Jake nodded slowly, blinking hard. Emma held the box close to her chest. It wasn't the resolution she'd expected, but it was something. A step toward healing. A step toward understanding. "Thank you," she said to Margaret. "For keeping this." The woman gave her a small smile. "Don't thank me. Thank your mother. She was always stronger than people gave her credit for." As they left the house on Maple Street, Emma glanced back at the porch, the wind chime dancing softly in the breeze. For the first time in days, she didn't feel lost. There were still so many questions. But there were also answers, buried in letters, in memories, in people like Margaret. And most of all, in Michael. The truth was messy, painful, and years overdue. But it was finally surfacing. And Emma was ready to face it. The living room was quiet that night, the only sound the occasional hum of traffic from the street below. Emma sat on the couch, the wooden box resting in her lap like it carried the weight of the world. The edges were worn smooth from time, and the brass latch clicked gently as she opened it once again. Across the room, Jake sat in the armchair, his envelope unopened in his hand. He hadn't said much since they'd left Margaret's house earlier that afternoon. He just stared at the paper, jaw clenched, like reading it would break something open he wasn't ready to deal with. Emma took a breath and unfolded the letter addressed to her. "My dearest Emma. If you're reading this, it means I've finally run out of time. I don't know where to begin, except to say I'm sorry, for the silence, for the secret, for not trusting you with the truth. There are things I should have told you and Jake years ago, but fear has a way of stealing time, doesn't it? When I was 17, I had Michael. He was the first person I ever loved more than myself. But I wasn't allowed to keep him. My parents made the decision for me. I still remember the hospital room, how quiet it felt after they took him away. It never stopped echoing. I built a life after that. I met your father, had you and Jake, and for the first time in years, I felt like I had a future again. But that doesn't mean I ever stopped thinking about Michael. I kept him in my heart, every day. Every birthday. Every Christmas. Every time you smiled, I thought of the brother you never knew." Emma had to pause. Her vision blurred with tears. Her mother's handwriting was neat, curved, but with little shakes in the ink here and there, like she'd been crying when she wrote it. She wiped her eyes, trying to hold herself together as she continued reading. "I didn't tell you because I didn't want to pass my pain down to you. I thought I was protecting you. I thought it would be better if you never knew. But now I understand that love doesn't need protecting, it needs to be shared, even when it hurts. You're strong, Emma. Braver than I ever was. I see the way you hold others up, even when you're falling apart inside. And I see the same heart in Michael. Please don't shut him out. You and Jake are his only family left now. And he's part of ours, whether we planned for it or not. I hope one day you'll forgive me. For the silence. For the secrets. For not giving you a complete picture of who I was. But most of all, I hope you'll open your heart. There's still more of our story to write. Love always. Mom." Emma didn't notice Jake watching her until she set the letter down on the table. Her eyes were red, her shoulders heavy with emotion, but there was something in her expression that hadn't been there before. A fragile kind of clarity. Jake still hadn't opened his letter. "You want to read it alone?" she asked gently. Jake didn't answer right away. He looked down at the envelope again, turning it over in his hand like he was trying to feel the truth through the paper. "I don't know," he said finally. "What if I read it and it changes everything I thought I knew about her? About us?" Emma leaned forward, her voice soft but certain. "It already has. Whether we want it to or not." Jake stared at the letter for a few more seconds. Then, slowly, he tore the flap and unfolded the paper inside. He didn't read it out loud. He didn't need to. Emma watched the way his face shifted, confusion, sorrow, the kind of pain only a child could feel when they realized their parent was human after all. When he finished, he laid the letter on his lap, closed his eyes, and let out a long breath. "She was scared," he said. "That's what comes through the most. Not regret. Not guilt. Just fear. She wanted to be better than the people who forced her hand when she was young. But she was still terrified of being judged by us." Emma nodded slowly. "We never would have judged her." "No," Jake agreed, but she didn't know that. There was a long silence between them, thick but not uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that wrapped around them like a blanket, warm, familiar, but heavy. Finally, Emma reached into the box and pulled out the third letter, the one addressed to Michael. "What do we do with this?" she asked. Jake looked at it for a moment, then leaned back in his chair. "We give it to him." Emma turned the envelope over in her hand. "You sure?" Jake looked tired, older than he had a week ago. But his voice was firm. "Yeah. He deserves to hear her voice." They didn't say much after that. There wasn't anything else to say. The weight of their mother's truth had settled between them, not crushing, but anchoring. A new understanding had started to form, about her, about each other, and about the brother they were only just beginning to accept. That night, as Emma lay in bed, she held her mother's letter close to her chest. She wasn't sure what tomorrow would bring. But she knew one thing for certain. The past wasn't just something they were digging up anymore. It was reaching back to them. The next morning was cold and gray, the kind of morning where even the light felt heavy. Emma wrapped herself in a thick cardigan and stood by the kitchen window, watching steam rise from her coffee. She hadn't slept much. Her mother's letter had stirred something in her, grief, yes, but also a growing determination. Michael needed to read his letter. No more waiting. Jake was already awake, seated at the dining table with his laptop open but untouched. He looked up when she walked in. "I messaged him," Emma said quietly. Jake gave a single nod. "Where?" "That cafe near the park. 11 o'clock. Jake shut his laptop with a sigh. "All right. Let's do this." The cafe was tucked between a bookstore and a florist, its windows fogged from the warmth inside. The bell above the door jingled softly as Emma and Jake stepped in. It smelled like cinnamon and espresso, comforting and nostalgic. Michael was already there, sitting at a corner table by the window, nervously stirring a cup of coffee that looked untouched. When he saw them, he stood awkwardly, unsure if he should wave, shake hands, or say something first. Emma took the lead, walking over with a calm expression that hid the storm inside. "Hey. Hey," Michael said. He looked between them, reading their faces like he wasn't sure whether to brace for anger or relief. Jake offered a nod. "You look like you haven't slept either." Michael gave a small, tired laugh. "Not much, no." Emma sat down first, setting the sealed letter on the table between them. "We found this. At Margaret's." Michael froze. "She mentioned your mom left something. But I didn't think." "She wrote it for you," Emma said softly. "And she wanted you to have it." His hand trembled slightly as he reached for the envelope. He stared at Susan's handwriting, his mother's handwriting, for several seconds before slipping it into his coat pocket. "Thank you," he whispered. They sat in silence for a few moments, the weight of the gesture sinking in. Jake leaned back in his chair, arms folded. "We read ours. Last night. She told us everything. Or, enough, at least." Michael nodded slowly, unsure where the conversation was headed. Emma leaned forward, her voice gentle. "You said you've been looking for us for years. Why now? Why not sooner?" Michael exhaled, his gaze dropping to the table. "I tried. I found out her name a long time ago, Susan Hartley. I even saw a photo online from an old article when she got a community award. That's when I knew. I recognized her smile. He paused, swallowing hard. But I didn't know how to reach out without destroying everything. She had a family. You too. I didn't want to crash into your lives like a wrecking ball. So I waited. Jake's eyes narrowed slightly. Waited until she died. Michael met his gaze, steady this time. I didn't know she'd passed. Not until I saw the obituary. I drove to the cemetery the day of her service, stayed back. I didn't even get out of the car. Emma blinked, stunned. You were there. He nodded. You were both standing by her grave. I knew it wasn't the time. Jake glanced at his sister, then back at Michael. His voice softened just a bit. So you came back. I had to, Michael said. She was my mother too. I needed to say goodbye. Anne. I needed to meet you. For the first time, there wasn't just pain in his voice, there was longing. Vulnerability. And something very raw, hope. Emma studied his face, so familiar and so foreign. What do you remember about her? Michael gave a small smile. She smelled like vanilla and coffee grounds. She used to hum Patsy Cline while cooking. And she cried the whole time she read me Goodnight Moon. Every single time. Emma's breath caught in her throat. She didn't know that version of Susan. She had never seen her mother cry over a children's book. But she believed it, because it sounded like love. She was just a kid when she had you, Emma said. Michael nodded. But she never felt like a kid to me. She had this sadness in her eyes. Even when she smiled. Jake spoke next, quieter than before. She wasn't perfect. But she tried. I think she tried her whole life to make up for something she never talked about. She didn't need to make up for anything, Michael said. She gave me what she could, even from far away. The three of them sat in silence again, sipping coffee, letting the truth fill the spaces between their words. Finally, Emma leaned forward. So what do you want now, Michael? From us? He looked down, then back up at her with a hesitant, honest expression. I don't know. I just want to know you. If that's something you're willing to give. Jake looked skeptical but didn't shoot it down. Emma gave him a brief glance, then turned back to Michael. We're not ready to call you brother yet, she said plainly. But we're not closing the door either. Michael gave a grateful nod. That's more than I expected. She smiled faintly. And we're not calling this forgiveness. Not yet. I wouldn't ask you to. But, she continued, maybe, we could take a walk sometime. Tell each other a few stories. Start from scratch. Jake gave her a look, somewhere between surprised and impressed. Michael's eyes lit up with a flicker of something warm, like the first glow after a long night. I'd like that, he said. Outside the cafe, the sky was still overcast, but the wind had shifted. It felt different now, not quite spring, not quite winter, but something in between. The kind of air that hinted at change. As they walked out together, side by side for the first time, Emma felt it too. The truth had shaken their world. But maybe, just maybe, it was also giving them a second chance. A few days had passed since their meeting at the cafe. Emma kept thinking about that moment, the quiet honesty in Michael's voice, the vulnerability in his eyes, and the strange, unexpected sense of familiarity that had started to grow. He didn't feel like a stranger anymore. Jake had been more reserved since then. He wasn't cold, exactly, just quieter. He hadn't brought up the letter again, or Michael. But Emma could tell he was processing it in his own way. His walls were thicker than hers, and maybe that was okay, for now. Today, though, was about something else entirely. Emma had been digging through the attic at their mom's house, what was now legally hers and Jake's, to sort out paperwork, boxes, and anything worth keeping. Most of it was old holiday decorations, boxes of Emma's childhood drawings, and Jake's third-grade science trophies. But shoved way back in the far corner, behind a box labeled Christmas '92, she found a small cardboard file box. It wasn't labeled. It was sealed shut with brittle, yellowed packing tape. And it looked out of place. Too carefully hidden. She brought it downstairs, heart thudding with a strange mix of excitement and dread. Jake was already in the living room, scrolling through his phone. He looked up as she placed the box on the table. "What's that?" "Found it in the attic," Emma said. "No label. It was behind the Christmas stuff. Like someone didn't want it found." Jake raised an eyebrow. "What do you think's in it?" Emma sat down and pulled a pair of scissors from the drawer. "Let's find out." The tape cracked as she sliced through it. Inside, there were folders. Dozens of them. Manila, old, and mostly unmarked. She picked one up and opened it. Inside were medical documents. Ultrasounds. Hospital bills. Forms with her mother's name and the date, October 1982. Emma's stomach dropped. "That's the year Michael was born," she said. Jake leaned forward, now fully engaged. Holy crap. She kept everything. Folder after folder, they went through a trail of documents, doctor visits, correspondence from a women's shelter in Oregon, even a bus ticket stub from Portland. There were letters too, some half-finished and never sent. All addressed to "my sweet boy." One letter, in Susan's careful handwriting, read: "I don't know if I'll ever be strong enough to find you. But I want you to know something, I never stopped loving you. Not for 1 second. They told me it was better this way. That I was giving you a better life. But it never felt like that. It felt like tearing a part of myself out and pretending it never existed. I am so sorry." Emma swallowed hard. The truth was here, in black and white. Their mother had been haunted by what happened. And she had documented it all, carefully tucked away in this box she never meant for them to find until, maybe now. Jake sat back, eyes glassy. All these years, she carried this. And we never knew. Emma nodded. She lived a whole other life before us. One we never asked about. Jake pulled out one of the final envelopes, flipping it over. His eyes narrowed. "This one's different." He opened it carefully. Inside was a single photograph. Susan, young, maybe 17, sitting on a bench in front of a brick building. She was holding a baby wrapped in a white blanket. Her smile was small, sad, and radiant all at once. Emma stared at the photo, blinking back tears. "That's him. That's Michael." Jake turned it over. On the back, in Susan's handwriting, it read: "Michael James Hartley. Born October 18, 1982. Mine, always." Emma reached for her phone. "You're going to call him?" Jake asked. She nodded. "He deserves to see this." Jake hesitated, then said, "I want to be there when you show him." Emma looked up in surprise. "Yeah." Jake nodded once. "I still don't know how I feel about all this. But I think I want to know more about her. All of her. Not just the version we got." Emma gave him a grateful smile. "Me too." That afternoon, they met Michael at the old park near their high school. The same one where their mom used to bring them on summer evenings to feed the ducks and chase lightning bugs. It felt right somehow, nostalgic, safe. Michael arrived looking more relaxed this time. The tension in his shoulders had softened, though his eyes still carried the guarded look of someone used to disappointment. Emma held out the box. "We found this. In Mom's attic. It's yours, too." Michael opened it slowly. When he saw the photo, his hands trembled. He stared at it in silence for a long time. I've never seen this before, he whispered. Jake stood beside him, quieter now, less wary. She wrote your name on the back. Said you were hers. Always. Michael looked up at both of them, emotion brimming in his eyes. I didn't think there'd be anything. I thought they would have burned it all. Or she would have forgotten me. Emma's voice broke. She never forgot you. She kept every single piece. Michael didn't respond right away. He just nodded, like his heart couldn't make words yet. I never had a baby photo, he finally said. I always asked my adoptive parents, and they said they didn't get one. Just a blank slate. That's what they called it. Emma felt something crack wide open in her chest. You're not a blank slate, Michael. You were loved. From the very beginning. Jake shifted his weight, then said something no one expected. You want to see where she used to take us when we were kids? This park was her favorite. Michael smiled. I'd like that. They walked slowly along the worn path, past the pond and swings. Emma told stories, about how Susan would make up songs about the ducks, how she'd sneak in homemade popcorn, and how she cried the first time Emma fell off the jungle gym and broke her wrist. Michael listened like he was absorbing light. For the first time, he wasn't just the outsider. He was part of the story. And somewhere between the laughter and the tears, the tension that had separated them began to dissolve, not completely, but just enough. The next morning, the three of them met again, this time not at a cafe or a park, but at Susan's house. Their house. It still felt strange for Michael to walk through the front door. He hesitated at the threshold, as if unsure whether he was allowed inside, even now. Emma motioned him in with a small smile. Jake followed silently, but he didn't look uncomfortable anymore. Not exactly warm, but no longer hostile either. This is the room where we used to build forts, Emma said, gesturing toward the living room. Like, full blanket kingdoms. We'd pretend the floor was lava. Jake chuckled under his breath. You used to make me carry you on my back like a damn horse. Emma grinned. Well, I was a princess. Michael looked around, his eyes soaking in every detail. The family photos on the wall. The dented hardwood floor. The scent of lemon wood polish and something faintly floral. This was a place filled with childhood, and he'd never been part of it. Still, it felt oddly welcoming. I don't remember any of this, Michael said, running his fingers along the edge of the mantel. But somehow, it feels familiar. Is that weird? Emma shook her head. Not weird. Just, right. They gathered around the kitchen table, where Emma had laid out the contents of the file box they found in the attic. Letters, photos, medical records, journal entries, all dated between 1981 and 1985. Michael picked up one of the folded letters addressed to my sweet boy and read silently. His eyes darted across the words, slowing, stopping, closing for a moment as he let the emotion settle. She kept writing to me even when she didn't know where I was, he said softly. She didn't even have an address. She just wrote them anyway. Jake nodded. It's like, she had to. Like it was the only way to survive it. Michael looked at Jake, surprised. There was no sarcasm in his voice this time. No edge. Just understanding. Can I show you something? Michael asked. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a worn, folded paper. The corners were frayed from years of handling. He smoothed it out on the table. I've had this since I was 14. Found it in my adoptive mother's desk drawer. It was hidden in a file marked closed, do not open. Emma leaned in. It was a photocopy of a birth certificate. Name, Michael James Hartley. Mother, Susan Marie Hartley. Father, not listed. Hospital, Portland General. Date, October 18, 1982. I never told them I found it, Michael said. But it's how I started piecing things together. I didn't know if it was real or a mistake. But I held on to it. Just in case. Jake's voice was low. It wasn't a mistake. Michael's eyes moved to Emma. You know what's strange? I used to dream about her. Before I knew who she was. Just, this woman's face. I never saw it clearly. But she'd be sitting at a table, writing something. And I always knew, she was writing to me. Emma's heart caught in her throat. Michael tapped one of the letters from the attic. It's like I felt it. Her trying to reach me. No one spoke for a few seconds. Then Jake quietly said, You think that's just coincidence? Michael shrugged. I don't believe in coincidence anymore. Emma nodded slowly. Me neither. Later that afternoon, they gathered in the living room. Emma plugged in an old camcorder she'd found in the attic, one of those clunky early 2000s models. To their surprise, it powered on. Inside was a tape already loaded. I haven't watched this yet, she said. Could be family Christmas, or nothing. But I figured we'd find out together. Jake slouched into the couch, arms folded. Let's hope it's not Mom singing off-key at karaoke again. Emma hit play. The screen flickered, the timestamp reading May 17, 2004. A moment of static, and then, there she was. Susan. She was younger, probably in her late 30s, standing in the backyard with the sun behind her. She looked relaxed, laughing as the camera panned across Jake and Emma playing in a plastic kiddie pool. Come on, Jake, don't splash your sister, she called out. Michael leaned forward, eyes wide. Her voice. He had never heard her voice before. I forgot what she sounded like, Emma whispered. On screen, Susan walked toward the camera. Closer now. She reached for it, covering the lens with her hand for a second, laughing. Then, her voice came again. Turn it off, Tom. I'm all sunburnt and, wait, is this still rolling? She backed up, grinning sheepishly at the camera. Then, her expression softened. To whoever watches this later. I love you. I love you more than you'll ever know. Even when I can't say it. Even when I don't know how. Michael inhaled sharply. Jake sat forward now, his jaw tense. Susan looked directly into the lens. And to you, my sweet boy. If you're out there, I hope this finds you. Somehow. Emma's hand flew to her mouth. Michael's eyes were full now, shimmering. He reached out and paused the video. Susan's face froze mid-smile, and the room went completely silent. None of them spoke for a full minute. Then Michael said, she was trying. Even then. Jake cleared his throat, looking away. She knew this day might come, Emma said. She left pieces everywhere. We just didn't see them. Michael nodded, his voice breaking. I saw them. Even when I didn't know what they were. That evening, as the sun dipped low behind the trees outside, they sat on the porch in a line of silence. Not awkward, just thoughtful. The kind of silence that says I'm still here. I'm still listening. Emma turned toward her brothers, both of them. I think she wanted us to find each other. Jake didn't argue. He just nodded slowly. And maybe to understand her better than we ever did. Michael leaned back, looking up at the darkening sky. For the first time, he said, I think I do. Emma woke the next morning to soft rain pattering against her bedroom window. The sky outside was overcast again, gray and heavy with that specific weight April often carried in their part of Oregon, like the air couldn't quite decide if it wanted to mourn or move on. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. Text from Michael. Morning. I was thinking, do you guys know anything about the man listed as father on my birth certificate? Emma stared at the screen for a long moment, then typed back. He wasn't listed. Not even a name. We've never heard anything about him. That's what I thought. I want to find out. I need to know where I come from. They met later that day at the public library, the same one Susan used to take Emma and Jake to every summer for the reading challenges and scavenger hunts. It felt poetic somehow, digging into the past in a place so rooted in memory. Michael had already claimed a table near the back with stacks of folders and a laptop open. He looked focused but tense, like he was bracing himself for something painful. "Any luck?" Jake asked, sliding into the chair across from him. Michael shook his head. "Not yet. Just leads. The adoption papers list a lawyer named Kenneth Mason. He handled the private placement, but the agency folded years ago. Most of the records were sealed." Emma leaned in. "But you're not giving up?" Michael gave her a small, determined smile. "Not a chance." Emma felt something spark in her chest, a mix of pride and guilt. They were only beginning to understand how much strength it had taken for him to come this far alone. "I called Margaret last night," Emma said suddenly. "Asked her if she ever heard Mom talk about him." Jake's head tilted. "The father?" "Yeah. She said she didn't know much. Only that he wasn't in the picture. That Susan never mentioned his name. Just that it wasn't a good situation." Michael frowned. "That could mean anything." "I know," Emma said. "But Margaret said there might be someone else who knows. Someone from the women's shelter Susan stayed at back in '82. Jake raised an eyebrow. "You tracked them down?" Emma nodded. "It's still running. Under a different name now. And I made an appointment. For all of us." Michael's eyes widened. "Seriously?" Emma smiled. "Tomorrow. Noon. You in?" He didn't hesitate. "Absolutely." The next day, the drive out to the women's shelter took them through parts of Portland Emma hadn't seen in years, old industrial areas giving way to quiet residential streets with small houses and wide porches. The shelter was in a two-story Victorian with a fresh coat of lavender paint and a tiny sign that read, "Safe Haven Women's Center." It was quiet, peaceful. There was a garden out front, and the smell of rosemary and rain hung in the air. They were greeted at the door by a woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and a gentle voice. "You must be Susan Hartley's family," she said, ushering them in. Her name was Diane, and she had been volunteering there since the '70s. "I remember Susan," she said after they settled into the office. "She was just a girl. Barely 17. Terrified. But strong." Michael leaned forward. "Did she ever mention the father of her baby?" Diane sighed. "Not by name. But yes. I remember the situation." They waited, braced. "He was older," Diane said slowly. "Not wildly older, but enough to raise some concern. They'd met at a part-time job Susan had, at a gas station in Gresham. He was charming at first. But when she got pregnant, he made it clear he wanted nothing to do with the baby. And worse, he told her if she said anything to anyone, he'd make her regret it." Michael's hands clenched slightly. "She was scared," Diane continued. "And she was alone. Her parents had kicked her out. We took her in for about 6 weeks before she was transferred to a maternity home." Jake spoke next, his voice thick. "Did she ever try to contact him again?" "No," Diane said gently. "She didn't want him to have any claim over her child. She refused to even write his name on the paperwork. She was afraid he'd find her, or the baby, later." Michael looked down. "So he never knew I was born?" Diane hesitated. "I think he knew. But he chose to forget." The room fell into silence. Emma reached over, placing a hand on Michael's. "You don't need him to define you," she said softly. Michael nodded. "I know. But I still need to understand him. Even just to know what not to become." Diane looked at him kindly. You already made a different choice, Michael. You came back. You faced the pain. That makes all the difference. Later, as they drove back into town, Michael stared out the window, lost in thought. I used to imagine my father was some kind of hero, he said finally. A guy who had to leave but wanted to come back. You know, one of those movie dads who just couldn't stay but loved you from afar. Jake glanced at him. Sounds like a nice fantasy. Michael smirked. Yeah. Turns out he was just a guy who ran when it got hard. Emma watched him quietly. You're not him, you know. I know, Michael said. But I have to keep proving it to myself. That night, Emma stood in her mother's bedroom alone. She opened the closet, slowly pulling down the final few boxes she hadn't touched. In one, she found something new, a sealed envelope with her name in Susan's handwriting. Heart pounding, she opened it. Emma. If you ever go looking, I hope you do it with eyes open and a heart that stays soft. There are things I kept from you because I was ashamed. But not anymore. You deserve to know the truth, not just about your brother, but about yourself. You're strong enough to carry it. I see it in you. I always did. Love. Mom. Tears filled her eyes, but they weren't heavy ones. They were light, warm. The kind that came when the truth no longer scared her. She looked up toward the ceiling. I'm not mad at you, she whispered. Not anymore. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The tension had settled into something quieter now, no longer sharp and disorienting, but dull, persistent, like a low hum under everything. Michael, Emma, and Jake had opened 100 doors into the past, and each one had a lock that hadn't been turned in decades. But there was one door they still hadn't opened. I ordered a DNA test, Michael said casually, over coffee on the back porch. Emma looked up from her phone. You did? He nodded. I figured it's the only real way I'll ever know. About him. About where I come from. Jake leaned against the porch railing, arms crossed. And what if you find something you don't like? Michael smiled faintly. Then I know not to become it. That was becoming a theme with Michael. Facing the past not to repeat it, but to rewrite it. 2 weeks passed. The box arrived in the mail on a Thursday afternoon, plain white, with DNA results enclosed printed on the side. Michael didn't open it right away. He brought it with him to Susan's house, where Emma and Jake were waiting. You sure about this? Jake asked. Michael gave a half shrug. Too late now. Spit's already in the lab. He opened the envelope slowly, unfolded the papers, and began reading in silence. Emma watched his eyes scan the page, back and forth, faster, then slower. Finally, he let out a long breath. Well, he said. I've got answers. Jake leaned in. What kind of answers? Michael held out the page. I have half-brothers. From his side. Emma blinked. Wait, what? Michael nodded. 2. One in Arizona. One in Washington. One of them's in law enforcement, actually. Jake gave a low whistle. Didn't see that coming. He's not listed by name, the father, Michael added. But the DNA match from one of the half-brothers is strong enough that, yeah. No doubt. Emma took the paper, reading it over. This one, Brandon Adams. He's your closest match? Yep. I already messaged him on the platform. Just a quick intro. I said I might be related, and that I'm not looking for anything, just curious. Jake looked skeptical. You sure you want to go down that rabbit hole? Michael sat back, hands folded over his stomach. I think I have to. By Sunday, Brandon had responded. Message from Brandon. Hey Michael. Yeah, this is wild. I've done the ancestry stuff for a while but never expected this kind of match. We should talk. It turned out Brandon was 43, lived outside Seattle, and had 2 daughters. He remembered his dad, Frank Adams, mentioning a girl in Portland once. A brief fling. Nothing serious, he'd said. Just a mistake he left behind. Michael's jaw tightened when he read that. Emma, reading over his shoulder, winced. Ouch. Michael didn't reply for a while. Just stared at the words. A mistake, he said softly. That's how he talked about it. Jake shook his head. Doesn't mean that's how Brandon sees you. Michael looked up. I know. Still hits weird, though. They set up a video call for that evening. Emma and Jake sat with Michael in the living room, camera propped up on a stack of books, nerves tight in the room like a pulled wire. When the screen flickered to life, a man in his 40s appeared, buzz cut, glasses, easy smile. He looked kind. Real. Michael, he said, this is, wow. Michael nodded, smiling a little. Hey, Brandon. Thanks for doing this. Brandon looked at the 2 other faces on the screen. These your siblings? Jake nodded. Half, full, not sure what label we're using. Family works, Brandon said. Emma smiled. We'll take it. Brandon's voice softened. I didn't know about you. I swear. My dad never said anything about a kid. But when I saw the match and your message, I started doing some digging. Michael waited. I think it lines up, Brandon continued. The timeline, his job trips to Oregon, the way he used to talk about this one girl he dated and ghosted. He wasn't proud of it. But he also never apologized. Michael let that sit. He's gone, Brandon said. Passed in 2018. Cancer. Michael nodded. Okay. I'm sorry you never got the chance to meet him. Or maybe. I'm not. They laughed, just a little. Not because it was funny, but because it was real. After the call ended, Emma turned to Michael. How are you feeling? Michael took a long breath. Like I closed a chapter one didn't even know was open. Jake added, you thinking of meeting them? In person? Maybe, Michael said. But not yet. I think I need to figure out who I am before I start being part of another family. Emma tilted her head. You're already part of one. Michael smiled at that. Yeah. I am. That night, as Emma was cleaning up the living room, she found a photo that had slipped behind the bookshelf. It was an old Polaroid, slightly faded. Susan, holding Emma and Jake in her arms, both kids no older than 5 or 6. She was laughing, eyes closed, head tilted back. The sun behind her made her look like a silhouette of joy. Emma stared at it for a long moment. Then she flipped it over. We may not always understand where we come from. But we can choose where we go. Mom. Emma felt the tears again, but this time, they came with something else. A sense of peace. For the first time in weeks, she felt like the ground beneath them wasn't shaking anymore. It was steady. And ready for what came next. The first time Michael had ever celebrated his birthday, really celebrated it, was when he was 10 years old. His adoptive parents weren't big on traditions, but that year they gave him a used bicycle and let him eat chocolate cake for breakfast. It was the happiest day of his childhood. Until now. Today was October 18th. His 43rd birthday. And the first one since discovering that Susan Hartley had never once forgotten the date. Emma had found more evidence of that just last week, old calendars stuffed in a drawer, each one marked on the 18th of October with a single word written in her familiar handwriting. Michael. No party. No celebration. Just his name, quietly remembered every year. It hit Michael harder than he expected. Emma was up early, baking. She wasn't a great cook, she admitted that freely, but she could follow a recipe if it meant something, and this did. Chocolate cake with buttercream frosting. Just like Susan used to make for Emma and Jake on their birthdays. Jake was in charge of decorations, which basically meant he picked up some balloons and wrote, "Happy birthday, bro," on a crooked banner. The question mark was a joke. Kind of. Too soon? He asked, grinning. Michael shook his head. Nah. Honestly, that's probably the nicest thing anyone's ever done for my birthday. Jake raised an eyebrow. Dude. We got cake and matching paper plates. You're officially part of the tribe now. Emma brought out the candles. And we're lighting all 43, so, hope you're ready for a fire hazard. They laughed, and Michael stood there for a second, watching it all, the balloons, the cake, the banner, the two people who not long ago were strangers. His siblings. His family. He swallowed hard. I don't know what to say, he admitted. Emma stepped closer. You don't have to say anything. Just make a wish. They turned out the lights, lit the candles, and sang a shaky, off-key version of Happy Birthday. Jake intentionally sang it with a country twang just to annoy Emma. It worked. When they finished, Michael closed his eyes. He made a wish. Then he blew out the candles. All of them. Later, they sat around the living room eating cake and drinking cheap beer. The laughter had slowed to that mellow hum that only happens when people feel safe and full and maybe a little sentimental. I brought something, Michael said, reaching into a paper bag. He pulled out a small box and placed it on the coffee table. Jake leaned in. What's this? Michael opened the lid. Inside were old cassette tapes, about a dozen of them. Each one carefully labeled in Susan's handwriting, Journal 1, Michael's First Kick, Portland Nights, and so on. Emma's hand flew to her chest. Oh my God, are those voice recordings? Michael nodded. They were in the file box you gave me. I didn't even notice them at first. I had to borrow a cassette player from a thrift store just to listen. He picked up one tape. This one, it's from a night in 1982. Right after I was born. They sat in silence as Michael clicked the player on. Susan's voice crackled through the speaker, soft, unsure, tired. It's 2:14 a.m. He just stopped crying. I held him for an hour. I sang to him, and he looked at me like he knew me. Like he forgave me. I don't deserve that. But I hope someday, someone will tell him I tried. I loved him. I swear I did. Emma closed her eyes. The sound of her mother's voice, vulnerable and unfiltered, filled the room like sunlight through stained glass. Michael didn't speak. He just sat, letting it wash over him. If you're hearing this, baby boy. I hope you're okay. I hope you're loved. And I hope you get to come home someday. The tape clicked off. Michael didn't move for a long time. I never thought I'd hear her say my name, he whispered. But I did. She said it to the dark. And now I know. Emma reached for his hand. You were never forgotten, she said. You were just, waiting. Jake, unusually quiet, said, that's a hell of a birthday present. Michael nodded. Best one I've ever had. Later that night, after the dishes were cleared and Jake had headed home, Emma sat on the front steps with Michael. The sky was clear, full of stars. A rare, crisp fall evening in Oregon. You think she knew it would all come out? Michael asked. Emma considered that. I think she hoped. I think part of her believed you'd find us. Or we'd find you. He looked up at the sky. I used to think I was born by accident. Like, I wasn't supposed to exist. Just a mistake someone made. Emma looked at him. You still think that? Michael shook his head. No. Now I think I was just delayed. They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Then Emma nudged him gently. Next year, you're getting a real party. Friends. Decorations that don't look like Jake made them in 5 minutes. Maybe even one of those inflatable bounce houses. Michael laughed. At 44. You're kidding. Nope, she said with a smirk. You missed out on too many birthdays already. We're making up for lost time. He smiled, the kind that came from somewhere deep, somewhere newly mended. I'm in. The rain came back in early November, soaking the sidewalks and washing yellow leaves into gutters. It had been a few weeks since Michael's birthday, and though things had grown more comfortable between the siblings, the house still felt like it was holding its breath. Something was unfinished. Emma could feel it in the attic. She hadn't been up there since they first found the file box. That had opened the floodgates, Michael, the letters, the tapes, even DNA tests and half-brothers. But something still tugged at her, some thread she hadn't followed all the way to the end. So one chilly Saturday morning, she climbed back up the attic stairs, flashlight in hand. Jake called up from the bottom step, "If you find a raccoon, don't name it this time." That was one time, she called back. And his name was Chester. Michael laughed from the living room. Wait, was Chester a pet? Jake rolled his eyes. Chester was an attic raccoon who Emma fed granola bars for 3 months before Mom found out and lost it. Emma smiled to herself, brushing dust off the wooden floorboards as she stepped around boxes. The attic was silent, except for the occasional creak. Her flashlight beam danced across boxes of old holiday decorations, a broken fan, and several bins marked toys and Emma's art. But tucked in the far corner, beneath an old quilt, was something new. A narrow wooden chest. She hadn't seen it last time. Emma dragged it out carefully, coughing at the dust cloud it stirred up. The latch was rusted but not locked. She opened it. Inside was a stack of notebooks, thick with yellowed pages and bent covers. Susan's handwriting was everywhere, flowing, sharp, emotional. Her journal. Emma held her breath. She opened the first page. December 3, 1982. Michael is gone. I didn't get to say goodbye. They wouldn't let me. They said it was better this way. I screamed until my throat bled. He cried when they took him. I'll never forget the sound. Emma's heart stopped. She flipped forward. January 10, 1983. My parents won't talk about it. They act like he never happened. Like I never gave birth at all. But I still feel him in my arms. I still dream about him. He has blue eyes. I know he does. March 5, 1983. I'm not okay. I pretend for school. For work. But inside, I'm a ghost. I thought maybe I'd start to forget, but I remember more every day. I write him letters I can't send. Emma closed the notebook carefully. Then she took the whole stack and brought them downstairs. They sat around the dining table, all 3 of them. The journals lay in a stack in front of them like some kind of sacred text. She never stopped thinking about you, Emma said, looking at Michael. He didn't answer right away. He just reached for the top journal and opened to a random page. July 9, 1986. I saw a boy in the store today. He looked about 4. Same age Michael would be now. He had his mother's hand, and he smiled up at her like the sun lived in her eyes. I had to leave before I cried. Michael closed the book and wiped at his eyes. I don't even know how to respond to this. Jake leaned back in his chair. She carried it with her forever. Yeah, Michael whispered. She did. Emma reached for a later journal, one marked 1995, and flipped toward the middle. June 21, 1995. I met someone new. He's kind. Gentle. He asked me about my past, and I couldn't lie. I told him. About the pregnancy. The adoption. Everything. He didn't run. I cried for hours that night. It's the first time I felt less alone in a decade. Jake blinked. Was that our dad? Emma nodded. It must have been. Michael looked surprised. So your dad knew about me? Apparently, Jake said. And he stayed. Guess I underestimated him. Emma turned to another entry, toward the end of that same journal. December 14, 1995. I found Michael's name in a newsletter today. A regional student award. Could it be him? Same age, same city. I clipped it. It's in the kitchen drawer. I don't know why. It just made me feel close to him. Michael sat forward. Wait, what newsletter? Emma's eyes widened. Hold on. She disappeared into the kitchen, rummaged through drawers, and came back a minute later with an old, yellowed clipping tucked between two pieces of wax paper. It was from a 1995 Oregon Youth Science Fair. And there, in the list of winners, was Michael Hartley, first place, Earth Sciences, age 13, Eugene, Oregon. Michael stared at it. She really did follow me, he said softly. Even if she couldn't reach me. Jake exhaled slowly. She knew. She knew you were out there. She just didn't know how to bring you home. That evening, after the others had gone to bed, Michael stayed up and read through more of the journals. Every page painted a clearer picture of a woman who was haunted, but hopeful. Scared, but stubborn. A woman who had lost her son, and spent decades writing him back into existence, one entry at a time. And the most unexpected part? There was joy in them too. Moments of laughter. Memories of Jake learning to ride a bike. Emma's first school play. Road trips and rainstorms and late-night kitchen dancing. She hadn't stopped living. She just lived with a hole in her heart. And now, somehow, that hole was healing. Michael closed the final journal, gently, as if it were made of glass. She never gave up on me, he whispered to the quiet room. So I won't give up on her. Then he did something he hadn't done in a long time. He went to sleep peacefully. The journals had changed everything. They were more than just words on a page, they were a lifeline. A bridge across decades. And though reading them had brought a kind of peace, they'd also stirred something new. A feeling that maybe, just maybe, there was still more to uncover. It started with a name that appeared repeatedly in Susan's later entries, Rita. Emma noticed it first. While scanning a 2002 journal for more mentions of Michael, she stumbled across this entry. February 12, 2002. Saw Rita today. She still calls him, the boy. As if not saying his name will erase the guilt. She never understood. Still doesn't. But I think she's softened. Maybe one day she'll forgive me. Maybe one day I'll forgive her, too. Who's Rita? Emma asked out loud, notebook in her lap. Michael looked up from the journal he was reading. That name's come up before. I think, yeah. Here. He flipped back to a 1991 entry. Rita told me not to stir it up again. Said digging into the past won't fix anything. But it's not about fixing, it's about knowing. Jake leaned in. You think she's talking about her mom? Emma nodded slowly. Has to be. Our grandmother. Guess Mom wasn't exactly close to her, Jake muttered. Emma frowned. I barely remember her. She died when I was what, 8? 7, Jake said. Dad never talked about her much. I remember Mom going to the funeral, but she came home quiet. Not sad, just closed off. Michael said nothing. He stared down at the page, lost in thought. You okay? Emma asked gently. I think this is more than just a grudge, he said. I think Rita knew more than she ever admitted. The next morning, the siblings visited Margaret, the family friend who'd known Susan since high school. If anyone knew about Rita Hartley, it would be her. Margaret lived in a small craftsman cottage on the edge of town, with creaky floorboards, endless jars of pickled vegetables, and a cat named Baxter that sat on the windowsill like he paid rent. She greeted them with warm smiles and a pot of peppermint tea, though her eyes lingered a beat longer on Michael. Not with judgment, more like curiosity laced with something else. Regret, maybe. You've grown into him, she said softly to Emma, touching her shoulder. I mean, you always had Susan's eyes, but now, you carry her spirit too. Emma blushed. Thank you. Once they were seated, Jake jumped right in. Margaret, do you remember Rita? Susan's mom. Margaret raised an eyebrow. Of course I do. Everyone in this town did. Rita was complicated. Michael asked the next question. Did she know about me? Margaret didn't answer right away. Instead, she stirred her tea slowly, like she was deciding how much of the truth they were ready to hear. She did, Margaret said finally. In fact, Rita was the one who made the call. Emma leaned forward. The call? To the agency, Margaret said. When Susan told her she was pregnant, Rita lost it. She said no daughter of hers was going to raise a child alone, not under her roof. She gave Susan an ultimatum, either give the baby up or get out. Jake's mouth tightened. Wow. She kicked her out? Emma asked. No, Margaret said. She didn't need to. Susan left on her own. She knew her mother wasn't going to help. Knew she'd only make it harder. Michael looked down. She chose to protect me, even if it meant losing everything. Margaret nodded. She was barely 17. But she was fierce. Rita underestimated that. Emma asked, did Rita ever change her mind? Margaret hesitated. Maybe. In her own way. She came to the house once, years later. Said she wanted to visit. She brought flowers. But Susan didn't let her in. She never said why. Michael's voice was low. Probably because it was too late. Later that afternoon, the three sat in Susan's kitchen in near silence, the journals stacked between them like sacred artifacts. So our grandmother pushed her to give you up, Jake said finally. And then pretended it never happened. Michael exhaled slowly. And Mom carried that weight for the rest of her life. Emma stood and began rummaging through the kitchen drawers, searching for something. She paused at the very bottom one, the one nobody ever used. Inside was a small envelope with the name Rita written in Susan's handwriting. No way, she breathed. She brought it to the table, carefully opening it. Inside was a letter. A single page. Dear Mom. You always said time would heal things. That one day I'd look back on it all and laugh. But I don't feel like laughing. I feel like you left me holding a lifetime of questions while you pretended everything was fine. I loved you. Even when you were cruel. Even when you refused to say his name. But you didn't break me. He's out there now. And I hope he knows I never stopped loving him. I hope one day, you find peace, too. Susan. The three of them sat in silence. Emma was the first to speak. She never sent it. Jake shook his head. Probably knew it wouldn't change anything. Michael looked up. But she wrote it. That counts. Emma nodded. It means she faced it. She said the things left unsaid. That night, Michael went back to his rented room, carrying the letter with him. He sat on the bed, staring at it under the soft lamplight. For a long time, he didn't move. Just breathed. Just existed. Until finally, he pulled out a notebook of his own. and began to write. Dear Susan. I wish I had known you. Not just as a name or a whisper, but as a person. I wish I could have told you I made it. That I turned out okay. That even though I never had the birthday parties or the lullabies, I still became someone you'd be proud of. I know now that you didn't forget me. That you remembered me every year, every page, every beat of your life. Thank you for loving me when you weren't allowed to. I'll spend the rest of my life trying to love you back. Michael. It started with a photo album. Not a flashy one, no gold trim or leather binding. Just a plain, dusty 3-ring binder tucked behind an old toolbox in the garage, barely held together with cracked plastic and yellowing page protectors. Emma found it while digging through storage bins, looking for her old high school yearbooks. Guys, she called. You might want to see this. Michael and Jake came out to find her sitting cross-legged on the concrete floor, the binder spread across her lap like some fragile treasure. Inside were photographs, some faded, some barely hanging on by the corners. They were unmarked, unorganized, and yet instantly personal. Is that Mom? Jake asked, pointing to a blurry black and white shot of a teenage girl standing in front of a battered Dodge Dart. Emma nodded. Yeah. That's definitely her. Look at the smile. Michael leaned over her shoulder. She looks young. Like really young. She probably was, Emma said. This must have been high school. They flipped the page. The next photo froze them all. It was Susan, still young, but this time she was in a hospital gown. Her hair was pulled back. Her eyes were tired but radiant. And in her arms, was a baby. Michael. Emma's hand flew to her mouth. Oh my God. Jake crouched down beside her. That's you, man. Michael stared at the photo for a long moment. I've never seen this before. I didn't even know it existed. He reached out, fingers trembling slightly, and touched the image like it might disappear. I always wondered, he said softly. What I looked like. What she looked like when she held me. Jake turned the photo over. On the back, in Susan's handwriting. Michael. 6:42 a.m. October 18, 1982. He didn't cry right away. Just looked at me. Quiet. Like he already knew. They all went still. She kept this, Emma whispered. She hid it, but she kept it. The rest of the album was a mix of past and present, snapshots of Susan's life that none of them had ever seen. There were photos of her on road trips, camping by lakes, laughing with people they didn't recognize. One photo showed her pregnant, standing in front of what looked like a rental house. She was holding a teddy bear and smiling shyly at the camera. She must have had a friend take these, Emma said. During the time she was pregnant. Michael studied her face. She looked happy. Like maybe, for a while, she thought it might all work out. Jake picked up another photo, this one with a child's rattle taped beside it. She saved this stuff, he said. Even when she couldn't keep you, she kept this. Michael closed his eyes. She was trying to hold on to something. Anything. Later that night, Emma brought the photo album into the living room and laid it on the table. They had gone through every page. Each one offered a small window into a version of their mom they'd never truly known. A version who was scared. Alone. But deeply, desperately loving. She never showed any of this to us growing up, Jake said. Not once. Maybe she couldn't, Emma said. Maybe it hurt too much. Or maybe she was protecting us. Michael looked up. Or protecting herself. Emma sat beside him. I think she carried this guilt for years. Like she failed you. She didn't fail me, he said quietly. She just didn't get the chance to fight. They sat with the album open for hours, talking about her, about the years they missed, about the ways loss echoes through a family like ripples in water. Eventually, Michael stood up. "I want to do something," he said. Emma looked at him. "What?" "I want to put together her story," he said. "Not just for us. But for everyone who thinks they've been forgotten. For the kids who never got answers. For the moms who never got to hold on." Jake raised an eyebrow. "Like a book?" Michael nodded. "Or a short film? A digital archive? Something permanent?" Emma's eyes lit up. "That's a beautiful idea." Jake smirked. "You're getting kind of poetic, bro." Michael grinned. "Guess I'm finally becoming a Hartley." The next day, Michael returned to the house with a small scanner and his laptop. He started digitizing the photos, cataloging each one, labeling them by time period, emotion, memory. He played the tapes again. Read the journals out loud, recording them with a microphone. And for the first time in a long time, he felt like he wasn't just telling his story, he was telling hers. He added a voiceover to one video clip. "She wasn't a perfect person. But she was real. And she loved me, enough to remember me when the world told her to forget. This is for her. And for anyone who's ever waited in silence, hoping one day, someone would come back." Emma watched from the doorway, hand over her heart. Jake muttered, "Okay, now I'm crying." "Are we crying? Is this a crying day?" Michael laughed. "Yeah. It is." That evening, Michael uploaded the first draft of the video to a private family folder. They watched it together. All three of them on the couch, like kids at a sleepover, passing a bowl of popcorn between them and soaking in every second. When it ended, nobody spoke. Until Emma whispered, she'd be proud of this. Michael nodded. "I hope so." Jake raised a bottle of root beer. "To Mom. The real one. The complicated, fierce, stubborn, incredible one." They clinked bottles. "To Mom," they echoed. And for the first time since standing at her grave, they didn't feel like they were saying goodbye. They felt like they were finally saying hello. The leaves were mostly gone by the time Thanksgiving rolled around. The sky had settled into its November gray, and the streets were wet with the kind of cold drizzle that made Oregon feel like it lived underwater. It was the first major holiday since Michael had shown up at their mother's grave. And no one really knew how to handle it. "We don't do anything fancy," Emma warned him. "It's just dinner, really." Jake chimed in from the other room. "That's a lie. She makes the driest turkey on the West Coast." Emma threw a kitchen towel at him. Michael laughed nervously. "Honestly, I don't care what we eat. I've never done Thanksgiving with family before. So, dry turkey sounds perfect." The table was already set, mismatched plates, candles that had clearly been used before, and a floral centerpiece Emma swore was boho rustic, but mostly just looked like sticks. Michael loved it. He'd spent years eating microwave dinners or grabbing burgers at gas stations during the holidays, always trying to act like it was just another Thursday. But this one was different. This one had people who knew his name. Dinner started awkwardly, like it always did with families figuring each other out. Michael tried to pass the rolls and knocked over a glass of water. Emma burned the sweet potatoes. Jake nearly choked laughing at one of his own jokes. But it didn't matter. Because somewhere between the gravy and the second slice of pie, it stopped being weird. Jake was telling a story about how Susan once made him wear an itchy sweater to church, and Emma kept correcting him on the details. Michael listened, wide-eyed, like he was eavesdropping on a childhood he never got to live. "And she made us take a photo outside," Jake said. "It was like 30 degrees. I cried because I couldn't feel my ears." "She said you were being dramatic," Emma added. "Then gave you hot cocoa with marshmallows that were too big for the mug." Michael smiled. "She sounds like she was tough, but good." "She was," Emma said quietly. She didn't always get it right. But she always meant it. There was a pause, and then Jake turned to Michael with a grin. "All right, man. Your turn. What's the weirdest Thanksgiving you ever had?" Michael blinked. Weirdest? He thought for a second. "Okay, one year, I was in Chicago, working a delivery job. Didn't have any plans, so I took an extra shift. I ended up delivering 3 frozen turkeys and 100 paper plates to a retirement home that lost power. And somehow, I got invited to stay." Emma smiled. "Did you?" "Yeah. Sat between 2 90-year-olds who argued about who invented cranberry sauce. One of them tried to set me up with her granddaughter." Jake raised a toast. "To unexpected family dinners." They clinked glasses, and for the first time, Michael didn't feel like an outsider trying to fit in. He felt like a brother. After dinner, they moved to the living room with full bellies and half-empty wine glasses. Emma pulled out a box of old photos she'd meant to go through for years. They passed pictures back and forth, trading memories like baseball cards. Michael held up one of Susan in a Halloween costume, dressed as a scarecrow, straw sticking out of her sleeves, grinning like she owned the whole world. "I wonder what she'd think if she could see us now," he said. Emma leaned against his shoulder. "I think she'd cry. And then boss us around." Jake nodded. "And tell us we were doing it all wrong. But secretly love every second." They all laughed. Then Emma grew quiet. "You know, for a long time, I thought our family was complete. That we had what we had, and that was it." Michael turned to her. "And now?" he asked. She looked at him. "Now I know we were missing something. Someone." Michael swallowed the lump in his throat. Jake clapped him on the back. "Glad you finally made it, bro. Better late than never." As the night wore on, and the leftovers were packed away, Emma pulled out a notebook she'd been keeping since Michael arrived. Inside were memories, little snippets, quotes, journal entries, photos taped to pages. She called it the Hartley Project. "Mom didn't get to put us all in one place," she said. "So I'm doing it now." Michael turned the pages slowly. There were photos of them as kids, copies of Susan's journal entries, printouts from the family DNA test site, even a list of Michael's firsts they were planning to experience together: first Christmas with family, first birthday celebrated properly, first sibling argument. Jake said that one already happened and one. "I want this to be for your kids one day," Emma said. "If you ever have them. Or for mine. Or for Jake's, if he ever grows up." Jake gave her a mock glare. "I'm excellent with kids." Michael chuckled, eyes still on the pages. "I never thought I'd have a family album. Or a reason to start one." Emma smiled. "You do now." As they got ready to say goodnight, Emma handed Michael a small gift, wrapped in brown paper and tied with twine. He opened it carefully. Inside was a framed photo. The one of Susan holding him in the hospital, when he was just hours old. Michael stared at it, jaw clenched, breath shallow. "She never stopped loving you," Emma said. "And now you'll never forget it." He looked up at her, then Jake. "I don't want to miss another one of these," he said. "Another holiday. Another dinner. I want to be here. If that's okay." Jake bumped his fist. "It's not okay." Michael blinked. Jake grinned. "It's perfect." The house had settled into a rhythm. Michael had been staying in the guest room for nearly a month now. What began as a temporary arrangement, just until things calmed down, had quietly become something else, a homecoming in slow motion. They laughed over breakfasts. Took turns cooking. Fought over the remote. Argued about movies. It was messy, it was mundane, and it was beautiful. But on the first Saturday of December, a storm rolled in. Not from the sky, but from a thin, forgotten manila envelope. It started with Emma's decision to clean out the attic, again. You missed a box, Jake said, pointing to a dented storage bin in the corner. Don't pretend you didn't see it. You just didn't want to climb over all the junk. Emma rolled her eyes but grabbed a flashlight. Fine. One more box. Inside were papers, mostly bills and tax stuff from the early 2000s. Receipts, some photos, a couple of birthday cards. And then, at the bottom, was a single envelope marked. Emma froze. Her breath caught. She turned it over in her hands, heart thudding. The handwriting was Susan's. There was no address. No stamp. No date. Just, a whisper of a message for someone she never expected to return. 10 minutes later, Michael sat on the living room couch, holding the envelope. Jake and Emma sat across from him, silent. She wrote this for you, Emma said softly. For if you ever came back. Michael ran his fingers over the words like they were braille. You guys sure I should open it? She wrote it for you, Jake said. I think that means she wanted you to. Michael nodded. Slowly, carefully, he opened the seal. The letter was a single page, handwritten, creased in the middle like it had been folded and refolded for years. Michael. If you're reading this, then the world finally did something right. I don't know how old you are. I don't know what kind of life you've lived. But I hope, God, I hope, it's been good to you. There are a million things I wish I could tell you. That I loved you. That giving you up was the worst day of my life. That I thought of you every day after that. I don't know what people told you. Maybe they said I didn't want you. Maybe they made you feel forgotten. But none of that is true. I fought. Maybe not hard enough. But I fought. I just wasn't strong enough to win. I wanted you to have a better life. One with safety. With certainty. With love. But please know, you were my son. You are my son. And I loved you before you even took your first breath. If I'm not here to tell you this in person, I need you to know. You were never a secret to me. You were my heartbeat walking in the world. Welcome home. Love always. Mom. Michael didn't speak. His hands shook as he held the paper. He blinked fast, once, twice, and then the tears came. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just quiet, steady grief and joy braided together, spilling down his cheeks like rain. Emma reached for his hand. Jake wiped his own eyes. Damn dust in here. No one laughed. Not this time. That night, the house was quiet. The kind of quiet that carries weight. Michael sat alone in the kitchen, the letter in front of him, a mug of cold coffee at his elbow. He kept reading it. Over and over. Like if he stared hard enough, her voice would rise off the page. Eventually, Emma joined him. She meant it, she said, sitting across from him. I know, he replied. It's just, crazy. Emma tilted her head. What is? All those years I spent thinking I was disposable, Michael said. Thinking I was abandoned. He tapped the letter. And here she was, writing me home. Over the next few days, Michael changed. Not in big ways. But the kind of shifts that happen when you finally see yourself the way someone else did. When the lies you've told yourself start to fade. He laughed more. He opened up, telling stories from his childhood, his teenage years, jobs he worked, places he'd lived. He asked questions about their lives, too, about their first heartbreaks, their worst haircuts, about the day Jake broke his wrist skateboarding and the time Emma got stuck in a mall elevator. And they answered him. Like he'd always been there. One night, Emma found Michael sitting on the porch, the letter in his lap again. She brought him a blanket, sat beside him. It still hurts, he said. I know. But it doesn't feel empty anymore. She nodded. She's not here. But you are. And we are. That counts for something. He looked at her. Do you think she'd forgive herself? Emma blinked. I think she already did. At least a little. Michael folded the letter, held it against his chest. I think maybe I'm starting to forgive the world. Emma smiled. That's a good start. Michael didn't plan on posting the video publicly. At first, it was just for Emma and Jake. Something personal. A tribute. A quiet way to say, this is where I came from. This is what I found. But the story had taken on a life of its own. People kept asking questions, friends, coworkers, old neighbors. Emma casually mentioned it to a friend at her journalism job. Jake showed it to a college buddy who was now a social media strategist. And one morning, over eggs and way too strong coffee, Emma floated the idea. What if we posted it? Michael looked up from his laptop. Posted what? The video, she said. The one you made. Mom's story. Your story. All of it. He hesitated. Why? Because it matters, she said. Because there are people out there who feel invisible. Who think they were left behind. You could help them feel seen. Jake wandered in, shirtless, holding a banana. Wait, are we talking about becoming famous? No, Emma shot back. We're talking about being human. Michael's story is more than just personal. It's powerful. Michael stared at the screen. The last frame of the video was a photo of Susan, laughing, alive, and a simple caption, she never stopped loving him. What if people judge her, he asked quietly. What if they call her a bad mom? Jake sat down. Then screw them. Emma nodded. Seriously. That letter she wrote? That's all the truth you need. They posted the video on a Wednesday. But the face was familiar. He called Emma into the room. Look at this. She gasped. Wait, is that? Michael nodded. I think it's one of Rita's grandkids. Rita, Susan's mother. The one who'd pushed for the adoption. The one Susan had never truly forgiven. Michael read the rest of the message. My name's Casey. I'm Rita's granddaughter. I found your story through the video. I didn't know about you. None of us did. But I'd really like to talk, if you're open to that. Michael sat back. The story wasn't done. Not yet. That night, the three of them sat at the kitchen table again. Michael read the message out loud. Emma leaned forward. Do you want to meet her? Michael didn't answer right away. Then, I think, yeah. I think I do. Jake smirked. Man, you're like the long-lost Hartley that keeps showing up and breaking hearts. Michael grinned. Just doing my job. But there was a seriousness in his eyes. This wasn't about drama. It was about truth. About finishing the circle. Michael stared at the cafe door for what felt like an hour, even though it had only been 10 minutes. He was early. He always showed up early these days, part habit, part nerves. But this one felt different. Bigger. Like walking into a room where the air already knew your name. Emma had offered to come with him, but he said no. He needed to do this one alone. At 2:07 p.m., the bell over the door jingled. And there she was. Casey. She looked about 25, wearing a navy sweater and jeans, long brown hair tied back, a worn leather bag slung across one shoulder. She had Susan's eyes. Michael stood up. Hi. Casey smiled nervously. Hey. Michael? He nodded. That's me. She slid into the seat across from him. For a second, neither of them spoke. Just watched each other, like they were studying something they'd seen before but couldn't quite place. Then she said, "You look like her." Michael let out a breath. "You do too." The first few minutes were cautious. Casey ordered an iced chai. Michael got a black coffee he forgot to drink. They talked about safe things at first, work, weather, how weird it was meeting someone because of a viral video. Then, Casey leaned forward. "My grandma, Rita, never mentioned anything." "Not once." Michael nodded. "Susan said she didn't want to talk about it. That she made her give me up." "She did," Casey said, voice quiet. "I found a few old letters in my grandma's attic after she passed. She never threw anything away. And one of them, it was from your mom. It said she wasn't ready to forgive her." Michael swallowed. "Did she ever regret it?" Casey looked down at her cup. "I think she carried it with her. Quietly. Like a scar. I don't know if she regretted it. But I think it broke her, in a way." The conversation stretched into hours. They talked about Susan, how she used to sing off-key while cleaning, how she loved coconut cake but hated coconut milk, how she used to write letters she never sent. They talked about family, Casey's two younger siblings, her dad, Susan's brother, who apparently never knew a thing. "I haven't told them yet," she admitted. "I don't know how to. It's a lot." Michael gave a small smile. "Tell me about it." Then Casey pulled something out of her bag. "I brought this. I thought you might want to see it." It was a photo. Old. Curled at the corners. Susan, age 17, standing in front of Rita's house, holding a small baby blanket. She wasn't smiling, but there was a softness in her eyes. On the back, "I still feel him." Michael held the photo like it was a piece of time itself. "Thank you," he whispered. A week later, Emma and Jake hosted dinner again. But this time, there was one more seat at the table. Casey. The four of them sat down to spaghetti and garlic bread and stories that crisscrossed generations. They laughed. They asked hard questions. They even debated who had the better taste in music. Emma still swore by Fleetwood Mac, Jake defended 90s alt-rock, Michael loved Springsteen, and Casey was full-on Taylor Swift. It was chaotic. It was loud. It was family. At one point, Casey looked at Michael and said, "You're the uncle I never knew I had." Michael blinked. "Uncle." It landed differently. Warm. Real. He nodded. "Guess I better start practicing dad jokes." Jake groaned. "No. Please no. One is enough." After Casey left, Michael lingered in the backyard, watching the stars come out through a patchy Oregon sky. Emma joined him, carrying 2 mugs of tea. "Was it weird?" she asked. Michael shook his head. "No. It was, kind of beautiful." She nodded. "She's part of us now, huh?" He smiled. "Yeah. I think she is." They stood in silence for a while, sipping tea, listening to the wind rustle through the trees. Then Emma said, "You know what I realized tonight?" "What?" "She didn't just give you up. She gave us up too. We lost 30 years of knowing you. Of fighting with you. Of defending each other. Of being annoying." Michael laughed softly. "Thanks." Emma nudged him. "You know what I mean." "I do," he said. "But we're here now. That counts, right?" Emma looked up at the stars. "Yeah. It does." The next day, Michael got a message from a woman in Georgia. Then one from a man in Michigan. Another from Ireland. All adopted. All searching. All wondering what it would be like to stand where he stood now, surrounded by people who knew the stories, who remembered the laughter, who had the same smile. He answered every single one. Not with answers. But with kindness. With truth. And with the line that had become his own. You were never a secret. You were someone's heartbeat walking in the world. The news traveled faster than Michael expected. One day, it was just family and friends watching the video. The next day, it was a post on a blog. The day after that, it was picked up by a major news outlet, with a headline that read, "He was given up for adoption, now he's telling the story of a mother's hidden love." Then came the interview requests. It wasn't the fame Michael wanted, but it was a reality he couldn't escape. The pressure of it settled in his chest, weighing heavier with every phone call, every email, every message. He wasn't just Michael anymore. He was the son of Susan Hartley, the boy who had been abandoned and found, the story that resonated with thousands of people who understood loss in a way that few ever did. It was strange. At first, it felt validating. But after a while, the flood of attention became overwhelming. There were days when he didn't want to talk about his past, didn't want to keep answering the same questions over and over again. One of those days, after another interview with a magazine, he found himself sitting on the porch again, staring at the trees that lined the backyard. The wind was colder now, the crispness of late fall in the air, but he barely felt it. Emma came outside, carrying a mug of coffee. "You look like you've been hit by a bus," she said lightly, sitting down next to him. Michael smiled faintly. "I feel like I have." She handed him the mug. "You don't have to keep doing this, you know. We all know the story now. You can stop." He sipped the coffee, the warmth filling him for a moment before the weight of his thoughts took over again. "I thought it would feel good, you know. To have people care. To hear that they understand. But, it's a lot." Emma nodded, watching the wind swirl the fallen leaves around the yard. "I get it. You didn't sign up for this level of attention." "No," he said, "I didn't." But it wasn't just the attention. It was the way the world seemed to expect something from him now, an answer, a lesson, a fix. He wasn't sure how to be a symbol, how to carry the weight of so many stories. People sent him messages, hoping for answers to questions they'd been carrying for years. And then there was the part of him that couldn't shake the feeling that Susan's love, her legacy, was too big for him to bear alone. "Is it weird," Michael began, "that sometimes I feel like I'm not allowed to move on? Like I have to carry this weight now? Like it's my responsibility to keep telling this story forever?" Emma considered this for a long moment. "I don't think it's about telling the story forever," she said finally. "I think it's about sharing the parts of it that matter to you. The parts that help you heal." Michael thought about that. "I guess I never thought of it that way. There's no timeline for healing, Mike. No expiration date on figuring out what comes next. Just, you take it as it comes. And you don't have to do it alone." The following week, Michael took a break from interviews. For the first time since he'd moved in, he slept in late. Spent an entire Saturday with Jake fixing up the old truck in the driveway. Went for long walks with Emma in the mornings. It felt strange at first, as though he were neglecting something important. But as the days passed, he realized that the pressure of being everyone's answer was starting to ease. The quiet moments were what mattered now, the ones where he wasn't Michael Hartley, the son of Susan, the viral sensation. He was just Michael. And that's when he made the decision. He reached out to Casey. They'd been talking every few days, checking in, sharing family stories. Michael invited her over for dinner, he and Emma would cook, and they'd catch up. It felt like the right time to take the next step in this newly formed family. Dinner was simple: chicken, mashed potatoes, and a salad. Casey was the first to arrive, and Michael greeted her at the door with a hug. "Glad you could make it," he said, smiling. "I promise, we won't make you eat anything weird." Casey laughed. "I'm not picky." The dinner was filled with the usual banter, Emma and Jake teasing each other over old family jokes, Michael making sure everything was just right, and Casey getting to know the dynamics of this new family. It felt so normal, so right. But there was an undercurrent to it all, the quiet realization that they were all making this up as they went along. The past was behind them, but what came next was still unknown. As they ate, Michael felt a new kind of peace settle in. Maybe it was the comfort of being surrounded by family. Or maybe it was the way they all seemed to just accept him, as though he'd always belonged here. After dinner, they gathered in the living room, the conversations turning more serious. "I've been thinking," Casey said, after a long pause, "about how to introduce you to my dad." Michael looked at her. "How do you think he'll react?" Casey shrugged. "I'm not sure. It's complicated." Michael nodded. "It always is. But I think he deserves to know," she continued. "Not just because you're family. But because maybe, just maybe, it'll help him understand Mom better. Maybe it'll help all of us heal a little more." Michael took a deep breath. "I'm ready for that." 2 weeks later, Michael found himself standing at a familiar grave. It was cold, the ground hard and frozen beneath his feet. But this time, he wasn't standing alone. Casey stood beside him, her hand resting on his shoulder. Together, they stood in front of Susan's headstone, both of them quiet for a long time. Michael couldn't help but think that if she were here, she'd be proud of the way they were starting to heal, together. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't a happy ending. But it was something. And that was enough. The wind whipped through the trees as Michael stood in front of the small house, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his jacket. It had been a long journey from his first meeting with Casey to this moment. Today, he was about to meet the man who, for most of his life, had been nothing more than a name on a birth certificate. Her father. He wasn't sure why he felt so nervous. After all, what was there to be afraid of? But the reality was, nothing could quite prepare him for this. Casey had insisted that they meet. And after weeks of preparing himself, of hearing her talk about her dad with both love and wariness, Michael had agreed. "This is it," she had said, before turning her key in the lock. "He's been wanting to meet you for a while. He's complicated." Michael nodded. He knew exactly what she meant. The door opened with a creak, and there he was. The man who had once been Susan's partner. The man who had never known he had a child, until the video, until everything had come tumbling out. "Dad," Casey said softly. "This is Michael." The man's eyes widened slightly as he stood there, looking at Michael like he couldn't quite believe what he was seeing. It wasn't anger or shock on his face. It was something deeper. Something guarded. Michael extended his hand. "Hello. I'm Michael." The man looked at it for a long moment, then shook it with a firm grip. "You look just like her." Michael wasn't sure what to say to that. He'd heard it 100 times by now, he wasn't sure he was prepared to hear it again. But he didn't pull away. He stood there, letting the weight of the moment settle between them. "So," the man finally said, stepping back. "You're really her son." "I am," Michael said quietly. "I've been looking for answers, for a long time." Casey took a deep breath. "Dad, I know this is a lot to take in, but we wanted to have this conversation. We think it's important." The man nodded, his expression softening, though it didn't lose its edge. "I never knew," he muttered. "I didn't know she was pregnant. She never told me." There was a heaviness in his voice, as though that truth had been hanging over him for years, just out of reach. Michael could feel the tension in the room. He could see the way Casey was watching her father, unsure how to bridge the gap between them. This wasn't just about him. This was about a family that had been fractured, one that, somehow, could never quite come back together. "I didn't know her the way you did," Michael said, his voice steady. "But I think I understand why she kept me from you." The man looked at him, confused. "You do?" Michael nodded slowly. "She didn't want to hurt you, I think. She didn't want to put any more weight on your shoulders. It was easier for her to walk away and not look back. The man looked away, his gaze turning distant. I don't know if it was ever easier for her. I think she carried that guilt her whole life. Casey stepped forward, her voice softer now. That's why we're here, Dad. Because maybe it's time we all stop carrying that weight alone. There was a silence. The kind of silence that echoed loud in the empty spaces between words. Finally, the man looked up at Michael again. I don't know how to do this, he admitted. I don't know what I'm supposed to say to you. I don't know what I'm supposed to feel. Michael smiled gently. You don't have to have all the answers. Neither do I. We're just figuring it out. The man nodded slowly. You're right. I don't have to fix it. I just want to know who you are. I want to know the person my daughter was trying to protect. They spent the next few hours talking, slowly, tentatively, about Susan, about their past, and about the future. It wasn't an easy conversation, and there were many long pauses, but it felt like the start of something new. The man, whose name was Roy, began to open up, telling stories about Susan when they were younger, about their dreams, their ambitions. He shared his regrets, too. As the evening grew darker, Casey made dinner, comfort food, nothing fancy, and they ate together, awkward but willing to embrace this strange, new dynamic. Michael could feel a sense of understanding beginning to take shape between him and Roy. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't an instant connection, but it was real. It was something. At the end of the night, Roy stood up and walked over to Michael, his hands in his pockets. I'm sorry, he said, voice low. I'm sorry I wasn't there. For her. For you. For both of us. Michael looked up at him, the weight of the apology settling in his chest. I don't need you to apologize, he said. I need you to be here now. Roy looked at him, his eyes searching. I want to be. If you'll let me. And Michael nodded. The days after that meeting felt different. Michael's relationship with Casey had taken on a deeper meaning. He wasn't just the long-lost son anymore, he was a man discovering what it meant to have a family, even in the most unexpected ways. And for the first time in his life, he didn't feel like he was walking a path alone. But there were still unanswered questions. There was still the mystery of why Susan had made the choices she did. There was the lingering truth that no matter how many people Michael met, how many conversations he had, the past could never truly be undone. He still didn't know if he would ever find complete peace with it. A few days later, Michael found himself back at the grave. But this time, there was a sense of finality in the air. Not the kind that closes doors, but the kind that opens them. The kind that says, I've found a way to move forward, and it's okay. As he stood there, Casey joined him, standing silently beside him. Together, they looked at the headstone. I don't know if she ever knew what this would turn into, Michael said softly. But I think she'd be proud. Casey's voice was barely a whisper. I think so too. And with that, Michael understood. Sometimes, healing wasn't just about answers. Sometimes, it was about learning to be okay with the questions. Michael stood at the edge of the same cemetery where everything had begun. It was early spring now, the world around him slowly waking up after the cold of winter. There was a quiet peace in the air, and as he looked around, he saw the flowers starting to bloom, the grass turning a bright green, and the trees beginning to bud. It was the kind of morning that made you believe in new beginnings. He couldn't help but think about how much had changed over the past few months. He'd gone from being an anonymous man with a past full of unknowns to someone who had found answers, faced painful truths, and discovered an unexpected family. But most importantly, he had found himself. The video he'd posted had exploded online, and while the world still had questions, Michael had come to a quiet conclusion about what he wanted for himself. Fame and recognition had never been his goal. He had simply wanted to find the pieces of his life that had been missing, and now, for the first time, he felt complete. Casey had become more than just his sister, she had become his ally, his confidant, the person who had been there when everything started to make sense. They were still figuring it all out, but that was okay. They didn't need to have everything sorted, because what they had was enough. Roy, Susan's ex-partner, his biological father, had also become part of the equation. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't an instant bond. But there was something in his eyes now that Michael hadn't seen before, a willingness to try. A desire to be a part of something he had missed out on. Michael had realized that, just like him, Roy was learning to heal. It wasn't easy, but it was happening. In its own time. Now, standing at the grave, Michael had come to honor Susan in his own way. He hadn't been sure if he ever would. The last few months had been filled with so much noise, the media, the questions, the attention, but at this moment, all of that had fallen away. He didn't need the world to understand. He just needed to honor the woman who had brought him into this world, the woman whose love had been so complicated, so full of sacrifice, and yet so deeply real. Casey joined him, her footsteps light on the grass. She stood beside him, looking down at the gravestone with a quiet expression. Her hand brushed against Michael's arm, a silent show of support. "You okay?" she asked softly. Michael nodded slowly, the air thick with the emotions he hadn't fully processed until now. "Yeah. I think I'm finally okay." Casey smiled faintly. "It's been a hell of a ride, hasn't it?" "It has," Michael replied, a small chuckle escaping him. "But it's been worth it." They stood there in silence for a few moments, the weight of everything hanging in the air. Michael glanced at the sky, his mind drifting to everything he had learned about himself, his family, and his mother. It hadn't been easy, no, it had been the farthest thing from easy, but it had been real. "Mom made a lot of mistakes," Casey said softly, her voice quiet but resolute. "But I think she tried, Mike. I think she really tried." Michael looked at her, seeing the truth in her eyes. It wasn't easy to forgive someone for the choices they had made, for the secrets they had kept, but it was possible. And maybe, just maybe, that was the final gift Susan had left them, the ability to heal. To forgive. To understand that life wasn't perfect, and neither were they. "I know," Michael said, his voice steady. "I think she did the best she could. And she gave me a chance. That's what matters." Casey smiled, squeezing his arm. "We gave each other a chance, too." As the sun started to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows over the cemetery, Michael realized that it wasn't about finding answers to every question. It was about embracing the unknowns, learning from the past, and looking forward to the future with the people who mattered. There were still things left unsaid, still pieces of the puzzle that didn't quite fit. But maybe that was the point. Maybe it was about finding peace in the imperfections. He looked down at the gravestone one more time. "Thank you, Mom," he whispered, feeling the finality of this chapter settle in his chest. "For everything." The wind stirred the leaves in the trees, as if in response. Michael took a deep breath, then turned to Casey, who had been waiting patiently for him to say what he needed to say. She smiled at him, and together they walked away, leaving the past behind them, but carrying it with them in their hearts. They didn't need to know every single detail of Susan's life. They didn't need to piece together every moment she had lived. What they needed was the love she had tried to give, the legacy she had left behind, and the ability to move forward despite the pain. And with that, they would. Together. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Just a few paragraphs of context. A couple of stills. No hashtags. No expectations. Just the story. And then they waited. The first few views trickled in, friends, co-workers, extended family. Then came the comments. "I cried. This is my story too." I was adopted and never knew why. This gave me peace. Your mom was brave. So are you. Sharing this helped me forgive my own mom. By Friday night, the video had over 30,000 views. By Sunday, it had passed 100,000. People were sharing it. Messaging them. Tagging siblings. Writing paragraphs of their own grief and hope and healing in the comments. Michael sat in stunned silence, watching it all unfold. I didn't think people would care, he said. Emma smiled. They care because you showed them the truth. On Monday morning, a producer from a national podcast reached out. They wanted to interview Michael. Not for drama. For depth. We tell stories that matter, the host wrote. And yours, it matters. Michael was terrified. But he said yes. The podcast episode aired the following week. It was raw and honest. Michael didn't hold back. He talked about the adoption, the silence, the journals, the photo album, the moment at the grave when it all began. He read part of Susan's letter. He even cried, once, quietly, when talking about the way she said he was, her heartbeat walking in the world. That line stayed with people. For days, it echoed online. I've never heard someone describe love like that. I didn't know my mom loved me until now. This line changed me. It became a kind of rallying cry. A reminder that love, even hidden, even painful, was still love. Then came the local news. Then the national segment. Then an offer from a documentary filmmaker. It wasn't overnight fame, not really. But it was a ripple, a widening circle of connection. And through it all, Michael stayed grounded. Every day, he checked the comments. Not for attention. But for people like him, people searching. People saying. I didn't think anyone would understand this kind of loss. My mom died without ever explaining why. I think I understand her a little better now. I didn't know how to forgive my parents. This helped me start. And then came her message. It was a DM, simple, private, cautious. Hi Michael. I think, we might be related. He clicked the profile. There wasn't much. A couple of photos. A cat. A blurry family portrait.